Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and good afternoon. My presentation here will provide a structured framework for understanding, classifying, and assessing financial risk from the perspective of a financial planner. It draws on the core concepts of risk theory, behavioral finance, and practitioner assessment methodology as outlined in the MFPC RFP program module 2, chapter 1, which is understanding risk. Okay, boleh boleh semak modul masing-masing. Okay, risk is inherently subjective. Its meaning varies from person to person, and even professionals assign definitions that reflect their own trait. Investors view risk as the chance of loss or gain. Economists sees it as volatility. Behavioral scientists frame it in terms of perception and cognition. For the financial planner, the critical insight is this: every client perceives risk differently, and every client's capacity to absorb a financial loss is unique. Maksudnya sini klien kita, mereka melihat risiko ataupun menerima risiko itu berbeza-beza antara klien kita lah, ada individu ataupun sebuah institusi tu. Okay, it is the planner's responsibility to diagnose both perception and capacity before recommending solution. Jadi di sini merupakan satu tugas financial planner untuk mendiagnosis, bermula dengan pengenalpastian lah, penerimaan dan kapasiti klien kita ataupun mereka yang menerima nasihat kewangan daripada kita berkenaan dengan risiko, persepsi dan juga kapasiti mereka. Okay, for our purposes, risk may be defined as uncertainty about financial loss from an exposure. Okay, loss is the unpleasant outcome of risk, and it can take two forms. First, losses that have already occurred, or we call as precipitated losses, and losses that exist as future exposures, meaning losses that might materialize. Okay, kataan sini might materialize. So this chapter 1 examines the concept of risk and risk tolerance, how information about risk situations can be handled, and how the practitioner can become more perceptive of the client's risk tolerance level and the possible reasons why a client accepts or declines a given risk. Okay. Jadi kepentingan di situ yang akhir saya sebut tadi, iaitu risiko itu yang terkandung di dalam perancangan kewangan, in a financial plan yang kita propose itu, okay, sama ada akan kesan dia akan menjadikan klien itu menerima ataupun tidak menerima plan kita, berdasarkan kepada risiko yang kita nyatakan. Okay. The word risk implies uncertainty about an outcome in a given situation. But it is important to distinguish it from the word chance, which also implies doubt about an outcome. The difference lies in the direction of the expected result. Okay. Risk focuses on the possibility of an unpleasant outcome. It can be expressed as uncertainty plus potential for financial loss. We talk about the risk of making a serious mistake or the risk of a severe market correction. the emphasis is always on the downside. While for chance, chance focuses on a favorable outcome. It can be expressed as uncertainty plus potential for gain. We talk about the chance of winning a contract or the chance of a profitable outcome. The emphasis is on the upside. This distinction matters in practice because the framing of an outcome as a risk or a chance shapes how clients emotionally respond to it. A financial planner who presents a volatile investment only in terms of its risk will trigger aversion. Okay? The same investment frame in terms of its chance may elicit interest. Okay? Jadi di situ kalau silap, maka tidak akan diterima plan itu, ataupun kalau apa tu dinyatakan dengan betul, maka plan itu kemungkinan akan diterima, mendatangkan minat pada klien tu dan diterima. Understanding this duality is the baseline for all risk communication. Loss is the unpleasant outcome of risk. Okay, to understand how a loss materializes, we trace it through 3 stages. Okay, hazard, peril, and loss. Okay, step 1, hazard or the catalyst. A hazard is a condition that creates or increases the probability of a loss occurring. Hazards do not cause the loss directly, they set the stage for it. There are 3 main types. Physical hazard, which is a tangible physical condition that increases the chance of loss. For example, an oil spill road increases the chance of a vehicle accident. The road condition does not cause the accident directly, but it elevates the probability. Second is moral hazard. Dishonesty or character defects in an individual that increase the occurrence of severity of the loss. For example, faking an accident to file a fraudulent personal accident insurance claim. The moral failure of the individual amplifies the loss. Third is moral hazard, which is carelessness or indifference towards a loss because of the presence of insurance coverage. For example, leaving the house unlocked while on holiday because all major household items are insured. The existence of a safety net breeds negligence. Step 2, peril or the source. Peril is the direct proximate cause of the loss. If a house burns down, the peril is fire. If goods are stolen, the peril is theft. Peril is the event that actually produces the financial damage. Step 3, loss or the outcome. Loss is the precipitated financial impact or the future loss exposure. Losses exist in 2 forms. Okay? Those that have already occurred and those that might occur in the future. Okay? 2 forms. One is already occurred and the second one is might occur in the future. The financial planner must assess both dimensions when constructing a client's risk profile. Risk can be classified along 2 independent branches, which is, okay, the first one, scope of impact. While the second branch is economic catalyst. By understanding these classifications, it will help the planners to determine which risks are insurable and which require alternative strategies. For branch 1, scope of impact, the fundamental risk is a risk that affects the entire economy or a large number of persons within it. Examples include hyperinflation, earthquakes, and war. Fundamental risks arise from the forces of nature or society and are usually not insurable because they are too widespread for the private insurance market to absorb. Okay, the second one for branch 1 is particular risk. That is a risk that affects only individuals rather than the entire community. Examples are robbery, fires, and thefts. Particular risks are generally insurable because their incidence is sufficiently random and limited in scope to allow actuarial calculation. For branch 2, okay, the first one is dynamic risk. Dynamic risk is the risk that result from changes in the economy that may cause financial losses. One of the most prominent examples in recent times is the disruption caused by rapid changes in information technology. Where some companies were forced to close while others emerge as new successes. Okay, disebabkan oleh perubahan. Dynamic risks are products of economic evolution. Disebabkan oleh perubahan. Contohnya adalah perubahan dalam persekitaran ekonomi. Okay. The second one is static risk. That is, risk that would occur even if there were no changes in the economy. In good times or bad times, there will be people who incur losses through mismanagement, dishonesty, floods, and other causes. Static risk confer no benefits to society. They produce only losses. Okay, this is one of the most important distinctions in risk management. The classification here determines whether a risk is insurable and shapes the planner's recommended strategy. The first one is pure risk. In a pure risk situation, the only possible outcomes are loss or no loss. Pure risk ni dia dua. Loss ataupun no loss. Okay. There is no possibility of gain. The two aspects of pure risk must be evaluated. Okay. First, the quantum or the dollar value that could potentially be lost. And second, the probability, that is the likelihood that the loss will occur. People accept or reject a pure risk after either an objective or subjective evaluation of these two aspects. Insurance is concerned with pure risk because the absence of a gain element makes actuarial pricing feasible. Okay. Then speculative risk. In speculative risk, the outcomes include loss, break-even, or gain. Investment risk is speculative. The investor may earn more than anticipated, earn less, sustain a loss, or achieve a profit on the principal. the potential gain distinguishes speculative risk from pure risk. Speculative risks are generally not insurable. Although speculative risks are not insurable, the pure risk consequences of a speculative venture are insurable. Okay. Let's say, consider a toy manufacturer launching a new product line. The commercial success or failure of the venture is speculative and uninsurable. Okay. However, the factory could flood, the machines could be damaged, or the toys could be stolen, resulting in production stoppage. These are pure risks embedded within the speculative venture, and they are insurable. The financial planner must identify both layers when advising clients engage in business ventures. This has two dimensions. Objective dimension, which is factual statistical reality, and second, subjective dimension, that is how the individual perceives and interprets the risk. The gap between the two is where most client misalignment occurs. For example, let's say we have a drunk driving scenario. Okay, first, the driver's perceived risk is 0. Why? Because the driver feels he is in control. Okay, although he is drunk. His perception is shaped by his past experience. Maybe because he has driven after drinking on several occasions and never had an accident before. Okay? He also derives a false sense of control from being the one behind the wheel. To him, his perception is his reality and his actions follow accordingly. Okay? Kalau sebelum ni dia pernah accident, mungkin dia dah meninggal ataupun dia dah cedera dan terus dia tak minum arak dan kan. Okay. While the objective reality the situation is statistically high in danger. Okay, why? Because statistical evidence shows that drunk driving has a significantly higher probability of causing a road accident. This is the factual, objective risk. Perception does not change this reality, but it profoundly affects the way a person behaves when confronted with it. Okay. Let's say the driver is a husband, and if he was aware of the facts without mental distortion, he might not drive. But his behavior is governed by his perceived risk, not the objective risk. While for the passenger's perceived risk is high. Let's say his wife sitting beside the driver and perceives high risk. Okay. Because her perception is shaped by external viewpoints and media reports about drink driving accident. Although she neither drinks nor drives, walaupun bukan dia yang minum arak ataupun bukan dia yang bawa kereta tu, her exposure to information creates a heightened sense of danger. The key lesson for the financial planner here is the interpretation of risk in any encountered situation is known as perceived risk, and the actual risk may or may not match it. Okay. So the client perception is reality. Walaupun itu adalah persepsi. Tapi bagi mereka, reality. Kan? Berbeza-beza itu pada orang lah. The financial planner must diagnose this gap and calibrate recommendations accordingly, working with the client's bounded reality while gently revealing the objective facts. Although people generally have the ability to reason logically, the underlying drivers of their decisions are emotional, right? Emotions distort reality and influence behavior. Okay? Economists and psychologists describe this as bounded rationality. That is, people are warped up in their thoughts and emotions, and their choices are filtered through rational thinking but shaped by emotions and values. Okay? For example, when the compulsory seatbelt rule was first introduced in Malaysia, many people complained, okay, despite the proven life-saving benefits. Yet, no one complains about wearing a seatbelt on an aeroplane. Kan? Even though the profession offers little protection in a genuine crash. Kan? Kalau, yelah, berapa meter tinggi tu kan, pakai seatbelt ke tak pakai seatbelt ke, hancur kan. Okay. This inconsistency shows that people are not fully rational, even in decisions of some significance. The Malaysian stock market's historical pattern of investors rushing in and out based on rumors and herd behavior further confirms this bounded rationality. Okay. Here we have 4 key cognitive biases availability. Okay, 4 key cognitive biases. The first one is availability bias. Okay, that is event that can be easily recalled or imagined. Okay, so the event, okay, that can be easily recalled or imagined, they are viewed as more probable. Jadi kita kata macam apa tu, dia atas pengalaman dia kan. Apa yang dia lalui dulu, yang dia jangkakan adalah berdasarkan itu. Okay. For example, although most insurance claims are paid without problems, sensationalized reports of unpaid claims create the impression that insurers routinely deny claims. Kan? Baik. Second, familiarity bias. Ignorance creates fear, knowledge dispels it. Okay, itu satu, one of the sayings lah. Here, risks that are intimately known to a person feel less threatening. Okay. Risiko yang kita dah tahu, kita rasakan dia itu kurang mengancam kan, kurang memberi ancaman. Most investors have favorite counters. Okay. For example, stocks they are familiar with and willing to buy, while avoiding unfamiliar ones regardless of their fundamentals. Sebab apa? Sebab dia dah familiar. Yang ketiga, the third one is evidence bias. There is the tendency to selectively seek evidence that supports existing beliefs and to distort or ignore contrary evidence. Okay. For example, okay, let's say a patient told by a doctor that a tumor is incurable might seek a traditional healer who promises a cure through rituals, ignoring the more reliable medical evidence. Okay. Jadi dia apa tu? Dia tidak 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 melihat kepada bukti. Okay. Sebab apa? Sebab dia sendiri adalah bersifat selektif. Okay. The fourth one is illusion of control. Okay. People who have personal involvement in or control of a situation feel less fear. For example, some investors prefer to invest directly in the stock market rather than through professional fund managers, deriving a false sense of safety from personal involvement, even though the fund managers are better trained. Okay. Sebab apa? Sebab dia ilusi. Berkhayal bahawa dia tu bagus. Boleh buat sendiri kan. Okay. If you refer to your module in that chapter, it also identifies several additional factors that restrain rational thinking beyond the 4 biases shown on this slide. Ada beberapa lagi lah faktor kan. Okay. For example, overconfidence dan bias tu yang lain tu daripada yang empat yang dinyatakan sini. Okay. Overconfidence iaitu tend to overvalue their personal judgement. Okay. Iaitu dia dia lebih yakin boleh menyebabkan bias. Okay, the second one is misled by short run trends. Iaitu they cannot distinguish between short run and long run trends. Contohnya event tu dia berlaku pada short run dalam jangka masa yang pendek. But the investor, for example, dia jangkakan akan berlaku dalam jangka masa yang panjang. Itu long run trend. For example, in the short run, it is possible for the stock market to keep rising without correction. And many people influenced by this short run trend invest at the wrong time. Jadi dia keuntungan tu padahalnya sekejap saja contohnya. Tapi dia pelaburan yang dibuat tu adalah untuk jangka masa panjang ataupun pelaburan yang dia buat itu mistime, iaitu dia labur tu dah berada pada hujung trend itu. Yang seterusnya adalah misjudging the magnitude of risk. Because for most people, the actual scale of a volatile risk is difficult to judge precisely. Magnitude tu, nilai risiko itu. Kerana dia memang kita sendiri sukar untuk menentukan atau kita kata mengkuantifikasikan risiko tu. Dan kita ubah ke dalam satu angka. Okay. Jadi disebabkan oleh itu, there is a tendency to overestimate ataupun underestimate. Iaitu the magnitude of risk. Kesan tu dari segi dari segi nilai. Kita tak tahu. Sebab risiko itu sendiri dia adalah sukar untuk dikuantifikasikan. Bila dah ada berlaku barulah kita tahu nilai sebenar. Contoh, for example, kalau kena tipu dengan scammer kan. Okay, kita boleh tahu dia sama ada dia boleh berlaku, whether it can occur or dia boleh berlaku ataupun dia tak boleh berlaku. Tapi kita tak dapat nak tentukan kalau dia berlaku tu berapakah jumlah dia. We cannot anticipate on that. Tapi bila dah berlaku baru kita tahu kita ditipu jumlah atau nilai dia sekian-sekian lah. Okay. Dan yang seterusnya adalah denial of risk. Many people engage in high-risk activities either do not know the level of danger involved or simply reject the possibility that the risky situation will materialize and harm them personally. For example, amateur divers who consistently go diving may deny that the activity is risky. Kan? Divers. Dia penyelam tu kan. Kalau dia kata berisiko, dia tak selam lah. Bagi dia tidak berisiko. But the danger posed by small negative probabilities is often denied completely, as if low risk equals no risk. So, sebenarnya dia masih ada kebarangkalian ataupun berlakunya satu perkara yang kita tidak ingini itu, walaupun dia kata tak ada, masih ada kebarangkalian itu kan. Dan kita we cannot deny that. Kita tak boleh kata tak ada risiko langsung. Okay. Yang seterusnya adalah influence of alcohol. Studies on alcohol consumption have shown that it affects a person's judgment in varying degrees. Memang ada kesan Arab kan. Compared to non-drinkers, those under the influence of alcohol tend to make more risk. Jadi bila dia minum arak tu, dia akan jadi more risk seeking. Dia lebih suka kepada risiko. Okay, itu yang dinyatakan dalam modul. Yang seterusnya adalah yang terakhir, influence by parties bearing the consequences. Okay, that is, people tend to be more careful and risk averse when their decisions affect themselves or loved ones, and more risk tolerant when the decision affect others. Okay, excluding tidak termasuk loved ones. Jadi dia menerima risiko, sama dia terima atau dia tak terima risiko tu, atau dia ambil atau tak ambil risiko tu berbeza. Okay, apabila melibatkan orang yang disayangi, orang lain lah, anak contohnya, tapi dia tu lagi berisiko, lagi suka ambil risiko apabila tidak melibatkan orang yang disayangi. Okay. Every person behaves according to how they are mentally wired. Okay. Individuals react differently to the same set of risk stimuli. Okay. Dia beza-beza mengikut pada individu. For assessment purposes, people can be classified into 3 categories along a risk spectrum. Okay. First, risk averting, or the majority. These are risk-averse individuals that are generally unadventurous people who view risk as a threat. They have a preference for certainty over uncertainty, and because of their conservative approach, tend to overestimate risk and focus on the loss potential of situations. Okay? According to a study by LIMRA, the majority of people fall into this category. The second one is risk indifferent. These are persons that are neither attracted nor repulsed by risk. They are not influenced by the danger or the opportunity that a risky situation presents. This is the neutral middle ground on the spectrum. And the last one are the risk-seeking people. These risk seekers are individuals who view risk as an opportunity rather than a threat. They have a preference for uncertainty over certainty and tend to underrate the degree of danger in risky situations. In daily life, they prefer variety and seek experiences that spice up their lives. Risk-taking people are considered an important trait for those involved in business. Okay. Research shows that most risk takers do not take risks in a uniform pattern. They choose to take risks only in certain life domains and not in all. A person who takes financial risk may not take physical risk. Based on research, 4 broad types of situations involve risk-taking. The first one is money. Okay, for example, investment. Second one is physical. For example, skydiving. The third one is social. For example, let's say singing contest. And the last one is ethical. Okay, for example, money laundering. Okay, these are the what we call as situations that we can find risk seekers. Studies found that a risk taker is more likely, okay, to take on the same or similar risk and less likely to take on an unfamiliar risk. Okay. Extensive research has developed the relationship between risk tolerance and demographic characteristics. From the module, okay, there are 7 main demographic factors. Okay. From the slide, okay, there are only 5 of them because we cannot put all the 7 into this one slide. Okay. The first one is age. We say that as a person grows older, there is a tendency to take less risk. Okay. Researchers have found a biological link for this. An enzyme called monoamine oxidase, MAO, is found in abundance in those who are risk averse, and this enzyme increases with age. Okay. It is important to note that based on your module, it states that a correlation, okay, not a direct causal link between MAO and age. Second, birth sequence. From observations, the eldest child in most Asian families tends to be more risk averse. Okay. In group culture countries, such as those in Asia, the eldest child is expected to be a role model for younger siblings and bear the responsibility of caring for parents in old age. Okay. And then, well, generally the wealthier the person, the higher their risk tolerance in both absolute and relative terms. Absolute risk tolerance is measured by the dollar size of wealth allocated to risky investments. It increases with wealth, of course, right? Because a wealthy person has more to spend and greater capacity to absorb risk. And gender and household. Okay. Women are generally more risk averse than their male counterparts across all ages, especially in Asian countries where environmental conditioning dictates that the man should take the lead and bear most family decision making. For occupation, government servants are generally more risk averse than those in the private sector, likely due to work environment conditioning. Okay, within professional groups, those in small firms tend to be more risk tolerant than those in larger firms. At the managerial level, risk takers tend to hold more senior positions, earn better incomes, and have greater authority. Okay? If you refer to your module, the marital status, okay, also have a connection with risk capacity. For example, single persons are generally assumed to be more risk tolerant than those who are married, especially singles with few responsibilities. Okay. And the last demographic background is educational background. Knowledge brings about a better understanding of issues and better assessment of risk. Education equips individuals with analytical tools to evaluate risk more objectively, which generally correlates with higher risk tolerance for informed decision. Why? Because of his or her knowledge. In financial planning, the purpose of measuring clients' risk tolerance is to help the client understand his or her disposition toward risk. With this understanding, the practitioner can make appropriate recommendations for the client's financial well-being. There are two broad approaches, and it is generally recommended that practitioners use both for greater accuracy. The first one is qualitative approach. That is, by method, the practitioner captures relevant information mainly through unstructured discussions with client. The evaluation is on an instinctive or generalized orientation. The second one, requirement. There high reliance on the practitioner's knowledge, communication skill, and experience. Meaning less experienced practitioners or those less in communication might struggle with this approach. The drawback is difficult to standardize across practitioners. Why? Because it is qualitative. Results are subjective and may vary from one panel to another for same client. The second approach is quantitative approach. That is, the client is interviewed in a structured format where the information obtained is translatable to a useful mathematical score. Right? The advantage is this approach is easily benchmarkable. For instance, the practitioner can compare the risk tolerance level of a 25-year-old female client against others with the same age and gender group. Why? Because standardization is simpler. Based on, in that case, based on the value given. Okay. The danger of this approach is it requires careful questionnaire construction to avoid skewing or biasing the client's answers. Poorly designed questionnaires, for example, may push clients towards answers that do not reflect their true disposition. The unpacking effect is a technique for improving the accuracy of risk assessment by breaking down broad questions into narrow, specific ones. Rather than asking a general question that gives a vague answer, the practitioner decomposes the query to elicit specific information in targeted areas, producing a clearer picture of the client's thinking and position. For level 1, that is for broad and global or no accuracy information. For example, question in this level, are you a risk taker? Or on a scale of 1 to 5, where would you place your risk appetite? These questions capture the client's general perception but are low in diagnostic accuracy because self-assessment is unreliable. Level 2 is the filter. At the middle level, the practitioner breaks down general capacity into specific asset classes. Instead of asking about risk, the question targets specific vehicles. For example, equities, unit trusts, commodities, real property, bonds, or derivatives. This filtering reveals that a client may be risk tolerant with equities, but risk averse with commodities. Okay, by providing a more granular profile. Okay. In level 3, there is for narrow and specific or high level accuracy. Okay. This level, questions target specific behavioral and emotional indicators. For example, do you experience sleeplessness after a risky investment? Or are you prepared to take a bank loan to invest? Or are you afraid to lose part of your wealth to bad decisions? Or do you believe a person can only move ahead by taking chances? Or would you see risky decisions as an opportunity to make money? So these narrow questions are the most diagnostically accurate because they measure actual emotions and behavioral responses, not self-reported labels. Okay. There are also several additional techniques beyond the unpacking effect that the practitioner should be aware of. If you refer to the module, There are also clients' investment objectives. That is by determining the risk inclination by establishing financial objectives. Okay. Also, the choice of investment vehicles. That is by asking the client to allocate a hypothetical lump sum across various asset classes. Okay. Okay, jadi ni semua adalah question design. Okay, apabila kita approach client di dalam menyediakan financial plan bagi mereka. One of the best methods to assess risk tolerance is to observe the client distinctive past behavioral pattern in monetary matters. While not a guarantee, past behavior provides a strong indication of how the client is mentally wired when thinking about finances, thus offering a good clue to prospective conduct. Okay. For example, by looking at the current portfolio, okay, the composition of the client's current investment portfolio reveals their true need. Okay. If the investments consist mainly of safe types, such as savings account, time deposit, unit trust, the client is likely risk averse. Okay. And then by looking at the leverage ratio, there is the ratio of current liabilities to gross asset. Okay, and this provides a direct measure. If a large percentage of the client's assets are leveraged with borrowing, then it is a fair indication of active risk-taking behavior. Then by looking at the insurance density, if the client is extensively covered by insurance across all areas of financial risk, it signals a highly active safety mentality and a strong likelihood of risk evasion. And then, by looking at the career activity. For example, the frequency of job changes is a general indication of risk taking, as every change requires moving into unknown territory. Any risk situation, a client faces a combination of the probability of loss, the probability of gain, the amount to be lost, and the amount to be gained. The permutations of these elements provide a wide spectrum for decision making and reveal the client's true disposition. Okay. Whether certainty or uncertainty, some individuals prefer certainty over uncertainty. Okay. When faced with a choice, the client with a risk-averse lean will choose the option with a low probability of loss. Okay. Even if the potential gain is modest. Okay. Minimum probability of success. Some clients stipulate a minimum probability of success before they will proceed. Okay. A high threshold, for example, 90%, indicates a strong risk-averse lean. The client needs near certainty before committing. Okay. A low threshold indicates a risk-tolerant lean. And then minimum required return. Some clients stipulate a minimum acceptable return rate because return and risk are positively related. The required return is a direct proxy of risk propensity. Okay. Jadi di sini kita dapat diagnose kebarangkalian dan juga preferences antara certainty dengan uncertainty, minimum probability dan juga minimum required return yang selalunya dikehendaki oleh objek. Okay, this final slide brings together all three diagnostic streams into a unified framework for building a holistic client risk profile. Input stream 1 is the demographic baseline. The client's age, gender, wealth, occupation, birth, sequence, marital status, educational background yang kita sebut tadi tu. So these are probabilistic indicators. Okay, they tell us where the client is likely to fall on the risk spectrum before any personal data is gathered. They are necessary but not sufficient. Jadi data-data yang tadi lah, contoh dari age, wealth, occupation dan sebagainya tu, dia adalah perlu, wajib, tapi masih belum mencukupi untuk kita profilekan client risk. Okay, then we need input stream 2, that is psychological distortion. Okay, the identified cognitive biases yang kita sebut tadi lah, availability, familiarity, evidence, illusion of control, dan overconfidence, denial, short run plan, influence dan sebagainya itu reveal the gap between the client's objective risk and their perceived risk. These three diagnoses how the client's perception distorts their reality. And then input stream 3, that is behavioral telemetry. The client's past actions, for example, from current portfolio composition, leverage ratio, insurance density, carrier volatility, yang daripada slide yang sudah menunjukkan. And their probability and payoff preferences itu provide the hardest evidence. Itu adalah bukti yang paling kuat. Behavior reveals what questionnaires and self-reports cannot. Jadi kita dapat lihat daripada situ lah. Yang paling kuat tadi, current portfolio composition, leverage ratio, insurance density, carry volatility, kemudian certainty versus uncertainty, minimum probability of success, minimum required return rate. Okay. Okay. So, mastery in financial planning is not just calculating the mathematics of your risk, but diagnosing the human psychology that perceives it. The financial planner must align the financial solution with both the objective reality and the client's bounded reality. A technically optimal portfolio that violates the client's emotional tolerance will be abandoned at the first downturn. The holistic profile ensures that recommendations are both financially sound and psychologically sustainable. It is generally recommended that financial practitioners use both qualitative and quantitative approaches in their assessment to ensure better accuracy. It is worth to note that no single method is sufficient. the synthesis of demographic data, psychological diagnosis, and behavioral evidence produces the most reliable risk profile for the client.